What's going on, guys? Dan from SSU bringing you another Edison format deck profile. This time I'm profiling my Volcanic Lightsworn deck. Lightsworns with a little bit of splash. Let's get right into it. We have the full 3 copies of Hamster and full 3 copies of Ryko. I like this engine a lot in Lightsworns. This makes most of my Lightsworn decks. I think it just gives you a lot of very good turn 1 plays that just get your deck going, leaves you with floating pieces that can interact with your opponent. This is your main form of interaction in Lightsworn, so I think it's really important to maximize on these 6 cards. We then have 3 copies of Celestia, sort of comboing with the 3 hamsters. I just like this card a lot. It can just blow people out in the early game. Hamster into Ryko, flip Ryko, drop the Celestia. You're just popping 3 cards. You're attacking for 23, just putting your opponent in a miserable position very early in the game. It's, of course, another name for Judgment Dragon, but it's just a really powerful card, and this deck does a decent job at enabling it. We have the 2 copies of Lyla. I was cutting this card down to 1 for a while, but I think it's actually really good again right now. I don't see as many Phoenix Wing Wind Blasts running around. I see more stable trap cards like Dimensional Prison, and this card is, of course, excellent against those type of cards. Just comes in, gets some value, and card's really good. You can synchro with it afterwards with something like a plaguespreader, so very good card there. I have 2 copies of Jain. I only see people playing 1 all the time, and I love this card. It just deals with established boards. It beats over anything that is a normal summon in the entire format. Even something like Sirocco, this card can come down and challenge Sirocco. Really strong normal summon, really good card. It just lives a lot, which also sets up Celestia. I think a lot more people should consider putting more than 1 copy in their Lightsworn decks. I mean, I even almost considered 3 just for how good it is against Blackwing. You're summoning it and threatening their board. And having an 1800 stick in play, just really strong. It mills a bunch of cards if it's going to stay in play. And very, very good card. I like this card a lot in the format right now. I have 2 copies of Wolf. Only 2 Wolves. I don't like breaking on this card. I think it's just a fine card. If you get the bonus of milling this card randomly, that's fine. But if you draw 2 Wolves at like any point in the game, it's kind of just lethal. I find a lot of times, like you just kind of die from losing the card advantage, unless you of course have like slow recharge to unbrick. But having only 2 Wolves just makes it very consistent. You're gonna have the very strong plus with this card without really the too much of the detriment, like having this card in your hand all the time. So just the 2 copies of Wolf. I then have the 1 copy of Lumina. This card is actually really good because of the volcanic shells in our deck, just getting free discard. Very strong. Lumina is very good, of course. We have 1 copy of Arrkus. I like this card a lot. Just kind of a tech card. A lot of people are just picking up on that tech. Just really good. Beats things like Wing Blast, and card's really strong. I like setting this card as well. 1800, they always think it's a Ryko. They're going to run into it with something like a Sangan. It just sits there as a wall, and then next turn you can push through without your Lightsworns being affected by cards that target. Really strong card, especially as a 1-of. It's searchable. It just does a lot of different things that the Lightsworn deck normally doesn't do, but Arrkus, very utility-based card. Of course, we have the big payoff of 2 copies of Judgment Dragon. Just unbelievable card. Does so much for this deck, just gonna win games with it, and I want to have as much access to this card as possible, as we'll sort of get into with the spell and trap lineup. But overall, just JD, everyone knows how powerful it is. You're just gonna win games with it. 2 copies of Honest, of course, just staple in this deck. But I really like it with the Jains, because you're always gonna have that Jain in play, and just having Honest to sort of like go with more of a beatdown plan, kind of comboing with the Jain there to apply a lot of pressure and also just protect your Jain. And I think this card pairs very, very well with Jain, and also, of course, with the Celestias, being able to pop cards and then Honesting to protect your Celestia is just going to be game winning. So very, very strong, of course. And then we have the Spice. We have the 3 copies of Volcanic Shell. I think this card does a lot for this deck. I think you have a lot of good cards that require discards that you can play. And I figured, you know what, we're going to be milling a lot. Let's just mill Volcanic Shell and get 1 or 2 free cards out of it. Very strong card there. Even if you just get 1 search, you know, you mill 2 copies of it, you're still getting a +1 out of your graveyard. And that can a lot of times be more useful than a Necrogarden effect or something like that. So I like the 3 Volcanic Shells. It does a lot for this deck, and I'll sort of get into that as we go forward in the profile. I have 1 copy of Plaguespreader, of course, as our sort of like 4th card we want to mill. With the 3 shells and the plague, of course, we have the wolves that we want to mill as well. Plaguespreader, just probably the most powerful tuner monster in the format. You want to have access to it. And I have 1 copy of Gorz as the sort of last line of defense. Gorz is just very, very strong, as many of you may know. For spell cards, 3 copies of Solar Recharge, of course, just getting through our deck. Basically staple, you just have to play all 3 for the most part. And then I have one copy of Charged Light Brigade. These are just the essential cards of the Lightsworn archetype. It really what gets the deck going and gets our shells in the graveyard to get value out of them. Speaking of getting value out of our shells, we have the full 3 copies of Pot of Avarice. A lot of Lightsworn decks, they play 1 or 2 copies, but this one wants to play 3 because those shells are just going to fill your graveyard very quickly, and getting multiple searches off of them is just extremely strong in this deck, because it lets the Lightsworn deck go really long and really grind out the opponents instead of just having to rely on power cards like Celestia and JD to close out games. Just gives you a lot of late game power, and drawing 2 cards when your deck is filled with Judgment Dragon is just going to be incredible. So we have the full 3 Pot of Avarice. We then have 2 copies of Monster Reincarnation. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Shell fuels this card. Having free discard for a powerful card like Monster Reincarnation to go grab your Judgment Dragon back from the graveyard is just actually incredible. And I think that this card is playable on its own, just being a -1, discarding like a random Lightsworn. But when you are able to discard the shell, it's just completely free, and that's what makes the shell, I think, worth playing, and just a little bit of an interesting take on the Lightsworn deck, as Monster Reincarnation, just a free add JD from grave to hand, is just unbelievable, very powerful. We have Foolish Burial, very good, of course, with Wulf, but also sending the Volcanic Shell for value over time. Very good card here. We have the Heavy Storm and Cold Wave, just kind of staples in Lightsworns. I think Cold Wave really strong. Just get rid of those back rows, wall them out, they can't use them, and then blow them away with Judgment Dragon. Then we have 4 trap cards. We have 2 copies of Wing Blast. Being able to play Wing Blast in your Lightsworn deck is very powerful, and again, like Volcanic Shell, just adding a lot to this deck. Being able to protect your monsters, saying protecting Lyla after you pop a card, protect it, and then be able to summon a Celestia over that Lyla on the following turn. Those type of plays are just game winning, and having access to Phoenix Wing Moonblast in a Lightsworn deck is not very common, especially when you're discarding a free card, and very, very good, and it just gives you a lot of tempo that the deck kind of needs, as it's a very normal summon based deck. But when you're ahead on tempo and your opponent has to answer cards like Jain, that's when your really powerhouse cards can just blow them out, of course, like Judgment Dragon and Celestia. So being able to use this card as a tempo play, put things back, and keep attacking down with your Jains and Lylas, very, very strong card here. And of course, comboing with Volcanic Shell for a very good removal suite there. And then, of course, another card comboing with Volcanic Shell, 2 copies of the Beckoning Light. Just having an additional card to discard for the Beckoning Light just makes it so powerful, because you're already taking a -1 by activating this card, but if it's free, if you're just even on the exchange, it's just extremely broken. You want to be able to have access to your JDs, access to your Honest out of the graveyard, and when you're activating Shell in the graveyard for a free discard, you're just going to get insane value out of this card. Very, very strong here. It can conflict with Pot of Avarice, but I think the payoff is worth it, as you're just grabbing back the best cards in the format, but JD and Honest. So very, 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 very good there. It is a 42 card deck because we're thinning our decks with the Volcanic Shells, and we're going to be milling a lot. But on to the extra deck, we have Armory Arm, Catastor, and Magical Android. We then have a 6 suite. I love to play a lot of 6s in my Lightsworn decks, because Plague plus a level 4 makes them. And we have the brionac and urquizas, as well as Goyo Guardian. These 3 are like pretty staple in the Lightsworn build, in my opinion. Just Urquiza is really good at getting those last points of damage in against something like a quick draw deck that keeps trying to wall you out with tokens. Of course, these 2 are just like legendary staples that are going to make every deck. And then I also play 1 copy of Tempest Magician. You can make this with Plaguespreader Zombie plus Lyla, and being able to turn cards in hand into damage is exactly what this deck wants to do to close out the game after, say, a Resolve Judgment Dragon, get them low in life, and sometimes you can't actually kill them. They set up a board and stabilize after they removed your Judgment Dragon. Tempest Magician just comes down, turns your excess cards that are maybe dead into damage, and wins the game. So very strong card there. Also, of course, you can discard Volcanic Shell, which is pretty interesting. Probably doesn't come up that often, but if it does, that is amazing. But either way, I play this in most of my Lightsworn builds. We then have 7s, Black Rose and Ancient Fairy, fairly staple. Then we have some 8s here. We have the Stardust Dragon, Red Dragon Archfiend, Colossal Fighter, and then the Avenging Knight Parshath. So pretty stable level 8s there. Just want to have access to all the good ones. And then we have Mistworm as well as Chimera Tech as the last 2 cards in the extra deck. Onto the sideboard, quick sideboard rundown. We have the full 3 copies of Yugioh Crow, 2 copies of Cyber Dragon, just the SSG staple. We have to play all 5 of these cards. Not every single profile, but these cards are just excellent. Put them into your deck and you're going to win a lot of games. DD Crow, you want to have access to it as early as possible. And Cyber Dragon, just going second in any matchup, you just want the card. So it's very good as it can apply a lot of pressure next to a Jain. We then have 1 copy of Tragodia for extra defense against the mirror match. Things that just want to kill you out of nowhere, things like Absolute Zero. Very good there. And 1 copy of Aaron. I don't like this card in the main deck anymore. I kind of just feels like it's kind of fallen out of favor for good reason. But I think having it be searchable via Charge the Light Brigade, just having 2 copies of a card like this is very good. And the effect is powerful in the right matchups, so we want to have access to it in our sideboard, just because playing 1 copy actually means we get to play 2, which is just a more powerful ability, and just being a lightsworn makes this card worth playing. We then have 1 copy of MST, 2 copies of Vortex. You can discard the Volcanic Shells, of course, to this card, just really strong, just get stuff out of the way. I would go up to 300 Vortex, but I think JD kind of handles the job there as the board wipe, as a board wipe card, but 2 Vortex is still very good, as you can just start beating down after the Vortex is resolved. I then have 2 copies of Royal Decree in the side, just against a very, very heavy trap decks. I don't like to play it against like most random control decks, but the decks that just play like 14 traps, like just play this, they lose on the spot, and it's very powerful. JD them out of the game. 2 copies of Pulling the Rug. I think this deck can fall behind very easily on the draw. Just being able to, if your first turn play is a Ryko, it's not going to be very good against, like, they go first, dump a Trueborn into the grave, Trueborn comes back, drop Caius. You just need an answer to Caius when you're on the draw, as Caius is just going to blow a lot of your normal summons out of the water, deny you a Lightsworn in the graveyard, and deny you from building a graveyard quickly. So I think Pulling the Rug just kind of puts a foil on that, gives you a little bit of extra time, and that's what this card is very good and worth playing for. And of course, wouldn't be an SSG profile without it. 1 copy of Trapped Out Shoot in the sideboard. This card is absurdly broken. It should probably be in the main deck, but guess what? Not today. 42 card deck. We're not going to try and squeeze this Trapped Out Shoot in. Just 1 on the side for going first, 1 on the side for the decks that don't set a bunch of back rows on turn 1. And it's going to be awesome. It's Trapped Out Shoot. It straight up wins games on the play. So that is the deck profile, guys. Let me know what you guys thought about the Volcanic Lightsworn deck, as I think it adds a lot of value. The Volcanic Shells do a lot for the deck. Just gives you a lot of different functionality, and also just value out of your graveyard. You're going to be milling a bunch of cards, so you may as well just, hey, let's get some value out of our graveyard with Volcanic Shell. And without further ado, this is Dan V from SSG, signing out.